Hello everyone. So today we are looking at lesson 3.3, solving equations by adding and subtracting. And if you'd like to follow along in your book, you're more than welcome to. We are on page 110. And for this lesson, you will just need a pencil to follow along in your notes. You don't need anything else for right now. So before we begin, let's look at our learning target. It is, I can perform the additive inverse operation to solve a simple equation. And you will be able to understand what that means in just a little bit. So actually, you're going to learn it right now. So if I say that I have an inverse operation, what does that mean? Well, it means the opposite value of the number is the best way to think of it. So here's an example of that. Let me make this a little smaller. Okay, so if you have a positive 12, what is the inverse of a positive 12? The inverse is a negative 12. Would you agree? What about a negative 15? What's the inverse of a negative 15? The inverse or the opposite is a positive 15. Would you agree? So anytime you see the inverse in any number, or if any number is ever trying to get to be the inverse of that number, then you look to see what the sign is, and you'll look at the sign immediately to the left of the number. So for 15, the sign immediately to the left of the number is a negative. For 12, there is no sign, so we assume that it's a positive. And then whatever the inverse, you take the opposite of whatever sign is in front of the number. So positive turned into negative, negative turned into positive. And please remember, this can also mean addition and this can mean subtraction. And that's what we're going to be getting into today. So this can be add 12, and the inverse, the opposite of adding 12 is subtracting 12. And for this one, the opposite of subtracting 15 is adding 15. All right. So if you need to, pause the video and write that down, kind of wrap your head around that. And let's go ahead and look at our first example. So we have example 1 is x minus 5 equals 11. Okay, so here's our first problem. Now, when you have a variable in the equation, you're not going to know what that variable stands for until you get the variable by itself. So the first thing you need to do is isolate the variable. Isolate just means to get it by itself. Like if you're isolated, that means you are alone. So we're trying to isolate the variable, get it by itself. And then the way we do that, well, we look at this side of the equation where the variable is on, and you look to see, well, what's with it? Right now you've got a variable, and then we have a negative 5. Well, whatever we do to one side of the equation, we have to do to the other side of the equation. And we try to get that variable by itself by performing the inverse operations on one side of the equation. So what is the inverse of negative 5? Remember, the inverse is the opposite value. So a negative 5, the inverse is actually a positive 5. So we add 5 to this side of the equation, but we have to keep our equations balanced. So whatever we do to this side, we have to do to this side over here. So these two numbers, a negative 5 right here and the positive 5 right here, cancel each other out because negative 5 plus a positive 5 is 0. So now we have technically x minus 0 equals, what is 11 plus 5 on this side? 11 plus 5 is 16. Well, if we have a number, some number minus 0, do we really need that minus 0 in there? We don't. So then our final answer, or our next step, is x equals 16. And we can ask ourselves, is x by itself? Well, it is. So this is the final answer to our first problem. And we can go ahead and plug this number in to check it. So we can do, to check your work, we can take the original problem and get what we found for x, which is 16. We can do 16 take away 5 equals 11. And is this a true statement? Yes, it is true. So that way we know that our answer was correct. All right, so go ahead and try this example on your own. This is example 2. And it's the same exact steps, just different numbers. So x minus 8 equals 22. Okay, so go ahead and pause the video and try that now. Okay, so if you finish this problem, you should try first to isolate the variable, get this x by itself. Well, x is not by itself right now. It has a negative 8 with it. So what's the opposite of negative 8? You should have written down that it's a positive 8. And then equals, whatever we do to the one side, we must do to the other side. So we still have to add 8 over here. This negative 8 and the positive 8 cancel each other out. I sometimes like to just draw an X over those two numbers because I know that they're gone. So then I have my X right here equals, what's 22 plus 8? Well, if you solve that, you should find out that it's 30. So X equals 30. On these problems, always check your work because in math, you can always see if you got the right answer before you're finished. So we have x equals 30. Let's plug it back into our original problem. 30 take away 8 equals 22. That is the correct answer. This is a true statement. So this is 30 is the correct answer. All right, so now let's go on to example 3. And example 3 is going to look like this. X plus 7 equals 19. All right, so this equation is saying that something plus 7 is going to give us 19. Now, some of them, they're pretty easy to solve in your head, but we still want to write them out because eventually they will get more complicated and we'll need to solve them by showing our work. So in these situations, we had a subtraction sign. Here we have an addition sign. So the same rule applies, though we're trying to isolate the variable. And how do we isolate the variable here? Well, x is with a plus 7, so we need to subtract 7. So we will do, right underneath that 7, you write a subtract 7 or minus 7. And then whatever you do to the one side of the equation, you have to do to the other side of the equation. So we'll do 19 take away 7 on this side. And then we'll solve it. So a positive 7 minus 7 is 0. We don't need to put zeros in our equation. So we have x equals, well, 19 take away 7 is 12. So go ahead and plug this back into the original problem to see if you're correct. Check your work. So you have 12 plus 7 equals 19. Okay, and yes, that is true. So this means that 12 was the correct answer. All right, you are going to do example 4 on your own, and I'm not going to go ahead and do it on the video. I want you to show me that you can do it. Use this equation and see what you get. And when you finish, I want to see your work, and then I want to see your check your work as well. And then tell me if it's true or false. And if it's false, it just means that there's some sort of small error up here that you need to go back and check. Okay, so this is about as complicated as it gets for our lesson today. The rest of our work from here on out will be a little bit more complicated, but the next lesson you actually see is going to be the same exact concept with multiplication and division. So enjoy your addition and subtraction because it seems pretty easy. Also, in your homework, when you get to class, there are a few ones that they ask you to just solve in your brain, or solve mentally is how they phrase it. So if they're asking you for mental math, they're just asking you x plus 3 equals 5. So they're saying this is super easy. You can just solve this in your head. What number plus 3 is going to give you 5? Well, you know that x is going to equal 2 because 2 plus 3 is 5. So some of them they're asking for mental math just because they're so easy that they think that you can do it in your brain. If you can't, you're more than welcome to still write it out, and that's totally acceptable as well. All right, so go ahead and scroll, or let me scroll to the bottom of this page to give you your quiz. And then rate yourself as red, yellow, or green. Red is, I need help on this. I need to see it in a different way. Yellow is, I think I get it, but I need some practice. And green is, this is way too easy for me. And if you choose green, you will need to get 100% on your quiz in order to do the green work in class. All right, so go ahead and let me show you the quiz. All right, so here's your quiz. Go ahead and solve each of these problems on a separate piece of paper. And for this one, I want you to check your work. So solve on a separate piece of paper and check your work. I want to see that you completely understand that you can check your work for all these problems to know if you got the answer right. So go ahead and pause the video now. It's only an 11-minute video, so you guys get off a little easy today. And then come to class with any questions you have tomorrow, and I'll see you then. Have a good day.